What's up everybody? Today I'm gonna do something really crazy, which is ranking the entire PSP JRPG library, but only the ones that got an official English release, digital, PAL only, whatever. Even so, I have 86 JRPGs to rank. So what I'm gonna do is cover the ones that are like really obscure or really rare, or the ones that I barely covered in this channel, and the ones that are popular or the ones that I cover a million times. I'm just gonna rank them and talk about them for like 5 seconds or something. So the list is, in alphabetical order, 84 JRPGs and 2 Korean RPGs. We'll get to see them very soon. And with that clarified, let's begin! Alright, we're gonna start with this little guy here called Adventures to Go. That is a very obscure, very unknown game. It's one of those RPGs that just can't decide what the hell they want to be. It's a turn-based RPG, but then it's a strategy RPG because there's random encounters in the maps, and then once you get into battle, you get into this, grid-based strategy-like battles. However, this game is extremely mediocre. I've talked about this game before. I thought it was one of the worst JRPGs on the PSP, but I think I was too rough on it. It's not absolutely terrible. It's just very, very mediocre, but mediocre leaning towards bad. Not that bad, but bad nonetheless, because it's very generic, nothing matters, you don't care about the characters, you don't care about the music or the game itself. It's very quest-driven and it's extremely repetitive. So Adventures to Go, off to a bad start. I'm gonna give it a D. Next on the list is another really obscure, unknown game called Generation of Chaos 80s Eclipse, or the other way around, 80s Eclipse, Generation of Chaos. Whatever. It's another experiment. There's a game called Dragon Force on the Sega Saturn, which is a strategy RPG about conquering territories and then characters going into these side-by-side battles against each other, a little bit like Suikoden or even Langrisser. However, this game is its own thing. It's like an evolution of Dragon Force, and it's not that good, to be honest. It's very convoluted. Plus, the battle mechanics are hard to get into. There's a lot of penalties, a lot of things, a lot of tutorials, a lot of things you have to be paying attention all the time. Once you miraculously manage to properly understand this game, you might enjoy it. Plus, the story and characters are stereotyped. Some fan service here. Characters are in school and they're kind of dumb. This game, story-wise, it didn't do anything for me. There's another game called simply Generation of Chaos, which is better, but we'll get to that one later. 80s Eclipse, I'm gonna give it a D. I think it's still a good game, obviously much better than Adventures to Go, but I'm gonna give it a D because I'm just not interested in this game anymore. Next up is the first Korean RPG. This is in Japanese, it's Korean, and it's called Astonisha Story, and it's absolutely terrible. It's on par with Adventures to Go. Okay, it's not that terrible, alright? It's not an E tier, but it's kind of bad, forgettable, mediocre. The story in this game is the only good thing about it, but everything else, the battle system, the map, the music, the graphics, are like, this is bad, man. Another D tier for me. First 3 games I'm covering, all D. Next up is Black Rock Shooter. Black Rock Shooter is based on an anime, and it's good. The battle system, it's like a little bit of a third-person shooter, but with turns and active real-time. It's another experiment, but this one, they got it right. It's a good experiment. It's post-apocalyptic. There's like zero humanity left in the world except for the soldiers and the girl and some of the bad guys here. And little by little, the story starts getting more interesting. There's more characters. Obviously, there's some stereotypes, some fan service, but that's okay. Overall, it's a good game. There's also these motorcycle missions that I couldn't really get into because the driving is kind of clunky sometimes. But either way, I think it's a very cool game. It's no masterpiece, but I'm gonna give it a B. Coming up is Blade Dancer, Lineage of Light, another obscure game. Well, it's one of the worst RPGs in the PSP. The game isn't absolutely terrible, but it's just bad. And The first 2 hours of the game are kinda okay. If you play this game, you're gonna be like, this isn't that bad. But then as you move on, you'll notice, you'll get bored, you'll get pissed off because it's very hard too, and eventually you'll be like, screw this game. I'm gonna give it an E. Because, you know, it's not that bad, but compared to Adventures to Go and the other, it's bad. Next up is Blazing Souls Accelerate. This is part of the Spectral Soul series. Idea Factory strategy RPGs before the existence of Compile Hard. And it's a good one. It's good, the story is really good, the characters are very interesting. It has some really dark moments here and there. And overall, it's a grid-based strategy RPG, just like most of the games from this franchise, the Agares games or the other Spectral games. It's basically built on making combos and connected combos with your characters and see what works and what doesn't, and create these new attacks with your characters together or by themselves separately. But give it a try, I recommend it. It's a hidden gem, it's very good, so I'm gonna give it a B. Next up is Brandish. Brandish is a remake of a Super Nintendo action RPG, top-down action RPG developed by Falcom. That's right! In this version you can play as two characters, the good guy and the bad girl, which are antagonists to one another, whereas in the previous Super Nintendo game you could only play as the guy, but here there's a mode with the girl, Della, which is very interesting. It looks like a roguelike RPG, but it's not. It's just your average, action RPG. It's just top-down and your character can move in different directions, but it's kind of clunky sometimes. Overall, I think it's a good game. It just doesn't stand out. Maybe the fan service is the only thing that stands out here, but honestly, everything else is just like... It's a good game, and in my opinion, it didn't need a remaster or a remake or whatever. And by the way, this is digital only. This wasn't released physically outside of Japan. It's still a hidden gem, so I'm gonna give it a C. It's a good game. Now this is Brave Story, New Traveler, based on a book. It's like the sequel to that book. Very interesting game, turn-based RPG. I covered this game several times. It's very good, so I'm gonna give it a B. Breath of Fire 3 needs no introduction. All you need to know is that it did get a physical release, but only in Europe and Japan, and we only got the digital version here in North America. You can't go wrong with this version, honestly. It's a great game. I'm gonna give it an A. Dune, this is an RPG. That's right, that is another very obscure game. I don't know if this game got a physical release or not. It's fun, it's kind of dumb. It's one of those games that look a little bit like between 8-bit and 16-bit, and they try to do some kind of roguelike fun RPG without being brutally hard like most of the roguelike games. This is a friendly entry into the genre, but still, this game does nothing for me. It's kind of forgettable. It's just a fun adventure. It's okay, I guess. So I'm gonna give it a C because it's not bad, it's fun, but it's okay. Next up, we've got two games that are turn-based dungeon crawlers in first person called Class of Heroes 1 and 2. Both of them did get a physical release. The first one is kind of cheap, easy to find. The other one is very rare, hard to find. It's somewhat expensive because it got a limited release by this company, I forget the name. But the thing is that they're both good games. I think the second one is a little bit better because it learned from all the mistakes on the first one. But honestly, these are somewhat charming, but at the same time generic turn-based RPGs because you create these characters. It's very quest-driven. There's nothing in the story that traps you. I guess they're just kind of there, and if you're into the cutesy, charming stuff, and you like these kinds of, battle mechanics in first person, navigation in first person, you should check them out. For me, I'm not a fan of that genre, so these games, even though I do think they're hidden gems and I recommend them, I think they're okay. So I'm gonna rank both games on the C tier. There we go. Next up is the second and last Korean RPG I was talking about. Not developed in Japan, obviously. It's called Crimson Gem Saga. Very good game. It's called in Japan Astonisha Story 2, but since that game flopped and it was bad and it was poorly received outside of Japan, they changed the name to Crimson Gem Saga. But it's the sequel. Direct sequel, I don't think so, but who knows, maybe they are connected in some way that I didn't see. Turn-based RPG, this wasn't strategy wannabe like Astonisha Story. It's very good, it's very hard, extremely grindy, but it has a very good story, interesting characters, cool music, the battle system like side by side, a little bit like Valkyrie Profile, but like I said, I got far into this game, but I never finished it because it was just too freaking grindy. But one of these days I'll come back to it, restart it, and probably finish it because it's very good. This is another game that I'm gonna rank on the B tier. Next up is Crysis Core, Final Fantasy VII, the spin-off, the prequel, whatever you wish to call it. I don't need to cover this game because everybody knows it. I wasn't a big fan of it, but still I think it's a great game, so I'm gonna rank it on the B as well. You'll probably rank it higher, but that's just your opinion. Next up are the enhanced ports of Disgaea 1 and 2, originally released on the PlayStation 2. These games are very well known, very popular. First one has like an Edna mode where you can play as Edna without Laharl in an alternative universe, alternative story. And the second one has a couple of characters unlocked as well. Either way, these are very good versions, very good ports, so they're just as good as the originals in my opinion. The first one I'm gonna rank it on the B tier, because it's a very good game, it's just not for me, very hard, very grindy. And the second one is the only one I finished, but on the PlayStation 2. I had a lot of fun on the PSP version, so I'm not the biggest Disgaea fan, so I'm gonna give it a B as well. I think it's better than Disgaea 1, but the difference isn't that much. Dragoneer's Aria is one of the worst RPGs on the PSP, if not the worst. It's just complete and utter trash. I know the art looks interesting and the battle mechanics doesn't look that bad. The battle system is okay, it's a turn-based average RPG, but the story, very generic, very predictable, very hollow, very stupid, and it's a total grindfest as well. It's a very depressing game, nothing makes you keep going. Developed by the same people who made Blade Dancer, a company called Hitmaker. This game is absolutely terrible, it's ass! I don't even know why am I covering it again. So let's just give it a straight E and move on. Next up we've got 3 games, Dungeon Maker 1 and 2 and Dungeon Explorer, Warriors of Ancient Arts. Dungeon Maker 1 and 2 are action RPGs where you generally will create the dungeons. They are randomly generated or generated by the player. They're both technically, they're different games, but one is a sequel to the other, but they're like forgettable. You shouldn't even care about them. I'm gonna rank both. I only included one image here, but because I was planning on ranking both on the D tier. And Warriors of Ancient Arts is an action RPG that reminds me of Phantasy Star Portable, which we'll get to later. It's a good game. I think it's a hidden gem. It's just after a while it gets a little bit generic because it's repetitive. You do the same missions and sometimes playing the same maps over and over again, which leads to players' exhaustion. So even so, I think the battle system is good, the story is a little bit more interesting, it has more story and background than the Dungeon Maker games. Overall, I think it's a better game, but it just doesn't stand out in anything. Another C tier for me. Lineage Original is probably one of the most boring RPGs I ever played in my life. Another turn-based RPG, dungeon crawling first person, very generic. I think the art style stands out a little bit. And it's also like, you know, a little bit dark and gothic for a little bit. But other than that, I have nothing to say about this game. It's just there. And you want to know something funny? It's one of the most expensive RPGs on the PSP, the physical version of it. Very rare, very hard to find. Not worth its price at all. I'm gonna rank this game on the D. Because it's just, Next up is a Kemco RPG, digital only obviously. It's called End of Serenity. I think it got another name in Europe, I don't know, but this game is very forgettable. There's another Kemco RPG we'll see later, which is far superior. This one is okay as well, it's just, it does nothing. I mean, it has some good things, you know, some fan service, and the story is kind of interesting because it's told through 2 different points of view, but other than that, yeah, another D. Next up is Fate Extra, one of my favorite RPGs on the PSP, masterpiece, great game, visual novel elements, extremely unique turn-based RPG. I don't need to cover this game once again because I've covered this a million times in my channel. Straight S for me. Oh yeah. Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions is an enhanced port of the original. I don't need to cover this game, it's a great game. I think this version is better than the PlayStation version, but that's just my opinion. I think it's a great game, great story and characters. I'm just not the biggest fan of it, but I do like it, so I'm gonna give it a B. Though I know a lot of you are going to disagree with that. Final Fantasy, the port, the good port, the best port in my opinion of the very first Final Fantasy. There's 1 and 2, the 2 games. Like I've said before a million times, these games are good, they just do nothing for me. Even the originals never did anything for me. They're kind of, nowadays, outdated, generic, but if you're gonna play these games, I strongly suggest these 2 versions, because graphically speaking and in terms of gameplay, they're more friendly, and they're just very good looking, so I'm gonna rank these 2 games on the C tier. I know they're classics, but I just don't really care about them. And I'm probably gonna do the same with Final Fantasy III, even though I think it's a better game than the other 2, more fleshed out. We never got the original on the Nintendo, so this was like a complete full remake with more story and more rich character development. But then again, I don't care about this game. I never cared about the DS version, never got any far into it. And the PSP digital only game, by the way, same deal. Final Fantasy IV, however, it's a great game, legendary game. I think this version is the best version to play of the game too, but that's just my opinion. It also includes the After Years, you know, that sequel with the other characters that are the kids of the main characters. And this sequel are told in different chapters, and it's kind of mediocre, but if you're a big fan of the game, might as well give it a try. I'm gonna rank this game on the B tier. Generation of Chaos is the game that I was telling you about before. It's very similar to 80s Eclipse. I just think the story is better and the gameplay mechanics are, I guess they're slightly more engaging, but it's still an okay game. It's just very hard to get into and to understand. Generation of Chaos, another hidden gem, but I'm gonna give it a C because it's one of those very acquired tastes, and it's hard to acquire, honestly, but it's not a bad game. I think it's a very original idea. Another Generation of Chaos game is called Pandora's Reflection, digital only, sadly, and this is an excellent game. The story is very dark, some gothic art style, I loved it, post-apocalyptic, more like dystopian, and these real-time battle mechanics. I covered this game a million times before because I'm a huge fan of it. So sad we didn't get a physical release. It's no masterpiece, but to me, this is an excellent game. I'm gonna give it an A. God Eater Burst is a terrible game, action RPG. Played God Eater Resurrection, the digital remaster on modern consoles. Forget about this one, it's bad. It's not terrible, it's not one of the worst RPGs, but it's just very hard and rough to play on the PSP. Another D. Growlancer 4, Wayfarer of Time. I don't need to cover this game, you know I'm a big hardcore fan of it. It's just extremely hard and frustrating. Only reason why I'm not gonna rank it on the S. Another A tier for me. Gungnir is a strategy RPG by the Department Heaven series developed by Sting Entertainment. Very unique game, I've covered this game quite a few times before. Check it out, but it's also very hard to get into. It's no masterpiece, it's a great game, but god damn it, there's just a lot going on, lots of sub-gameplay mechanics that in my opinion shouldn't have been there. It would have worked perfectly as a normal grid-based strategy RPG with some unique aspects here and there. Gungnir is a B tier for me. Gurumin is another action RPG developed by Falcom, that's right, but this was like their idea to do something like an action RPG for kids. It's very charming, the music is kind of memorable, the character, she's fine, she makes you laugh. This is a great game, it doesn't stand out, it's too short. This game is something you can beat in less than 15 hours, but it's very fun to play, and there's some puzzles here and there, and it's a very easy game overall, you won't have trouble within it whatsoever. I'm gonna give it a B. Half Minute Hero is a very fun RPG. I love this game, there is a physical version of it, miraculously. One of those games that are like with 8-bit graphics, and it's just so unique, so original, so much fun. You probably already know this game, if you don't, go watch my stream. I totally recommend this. I'm gonna give it an A just because I streamed it recently, and my stream was a lot of fun. Okay, here we got a very unknown trilogy called The Legend of Heroes. Yes, by Falcom. Yes, this predates the Trails series. Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, A Tear of Vermilion, and Song of the Ocean. We first got A Tear of Vermilion, even though that's the second one of the trilogy. It's called the Gagarv trilogy because that's the name of the continent or the universe, the world it takes place in. And, well, the first one, Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, it's a good game. It's very short, very generic, very forgettable, but it's okay. I think it's better than most of the D tiers we've seen so far, so I'm gonna give it a C. It's also very short and extremely easy. Tear of Vermilion is the best in the trilogy. It's a great game. Characters are better, the story is way more interesting, battle system is a little more challenging, it's the hardest of the three, so this game goes straight to the B tier. And last but not least, Song of the Ocean, probably the holy grail nowadays, along with Lineage, original, very expensive game nowadays, hard to find. And once again, it's okay, it's better than Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, but it's not better than Tear of Vermilion, so I'm gonna give it a C. Moving on to Hexis Force, I've covered this game a million times, one of my favorite turn-based RPGs on the system. Again, it's no masterpiece, because there are some things that could have been better, but it's almost a masterpiece. This is an excellent game, so I'm gonna rank it on the A tier. Jeanne d'Arc, another A tier for me, great strategy RPG, obscure story, excellent game, you know this game already. Gcandia, that is a very fun 8-bit styled action RPG, side-scroller. It's very addictive because it's very easy to, but obviously as you move on it starts getting more challenging and there's a timer. You gotta beat these dungeons in a set of time, but it's not stressful. It's not as stressful as in Half Minute Hero. This is, you can take your time and if you die, it's okay. I mean, it's a very fun game, but eventually after several hours of gameplay you get tired of it. You're like, I mean, the game just keeps going and going and going. It's a very cool game. I'm gonna put it on the B tier. Kingdom Hearts on the PSP is a spin-off. I think it's the prequel to them all with 3 playable characters. I think it's good, so I'm gonna give it a C, but just because I just don't really care about Kingdom Hearts. Next up is Kingdom of Paradise. That is a game that I really wanted to like, because the battle system based on these combos, not exactly combos, like creating these different skills, different attack combinations, it was just very cool. I really wanted to like this game, but it's so unbalanced. Like, you get into a boss fight and it's almost impossible. You get to the next boss fight and it's okay, then the next one kicks your sorry ass again. And everything else just seems very generic. Story, characters, the graphics. Kingdom of Paradise is a mediocre game, but it's not bad, so I'm gonna give it a D. Next up is Nights in the Nightmare. I hate this game. It's one of the most convoluted, if not the most convoluted piece of trash I've ever played in my life. It's not terrible, it's just hard to explain. This strategy RPG with some shooter elements, real time. Oh man, I'm gonna give it a D and let's move on before I change my mind. Lord of Arcana, it's a very hardcore, very hard action RPG. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Soul series and this other game called Soul Sacrifice. It's a quest-driven game, but it's all about beating the bosses. You go into these areas and fight the enemies and to level up to gain experience, but that doesn't stand out. Where it stands out is the bosses. This game should have been a boss rush in my opinion. The enemies are just kind of there to help you level up and gain experience. It's a very cool game. Unfortunately, it's just very hard. This is a game I should have included in my latest video, hardest JRPGs I'll never beat, because it's just, with the bosses, fuck man. Lord of Arcana is, well, it's a B tier. I'm gonna give it a B tier, just for now. Although it's, you know, Lunar, the Silver Star Harmony, it's, in my opinion, the best version of this excellent game to play. That's the version I finished, so I'm gonna give it an A. It's an excellent game. Mana Kimia Student Alliance is a port of the original on the PS2, and graphically speaking, it was like a downgraded version. It's good, but I think I like the PS2 version more, so it's still a great game, so I'm gonna give it a B. I mean, if you can't play the PS2 version, might as well play this one. Mana Er Chronicle, one of the most hated games on the system. It is kind of bad, I know, but I like the game. I still think it's a hidden gem. It's just full of major problems, like the battle system is very clunky and it takes a while. I mean, you start this game and it's very fun, it's a very cool comedy, but as you move on, you're like, when is this game? I mean, it gets boring, but then another character joins in and then another one, and it gets all the more fun. You gotta be patient with this RPG. It does stand out with the comedy. Play this game for the story and characters, because it's just a laughing stock in the good sense of the word. Mana Er Chronicle, I'm gonna give it a C, because, you know, in terms of gameplay, it is kind of bad. There's 3 Monster Hunter games on the PSP. Monster Hunter Freedom, Monster Hunter Freedom 2, and the expansion pack called Infinite. I don't care about Monster Hunter, so to me these are games that I'm gonna rank on the C. Just because, all three of them. Monster Kingdom Jewel Summoner, another game that had a lot of potential, just like Kingdom of Paradise. I really wanted to like this game, but it turned out to be sort of like a Pokemon clone where you recruit monsters and train them and they fight in your stead, and then it's extremely unbalanced. You know, one boss battle is okay and the next one kicks your ass, you gotta grind, and the story and characters are very generic. The art style is interesting, but it starts off good, the premise is very good, but then it all goes to hell, man. It's a bad game, but it's not that bad, so another D tier. Next up is Misty Chronicles, the other Kemco RPG I was talking about. Much better than End of Serenity, to be honest. It's a very good game. It's probably my favorite Kemco RPG because it is a true love letter, and it's one of the first love letters to 8-bit RPGs. And it's just very memorable. The characters, the stories, the music is very good. The battle mechanics, including these giant summons that can help you in your party. I don't know, man. I think this game is great. It's a hidden gem, so I'm gonna rank it on the B. Neverland Card Battles. It's probably a game that shouldn't be here because it's more of a card-based game, like Concept Saga, Concept Revolve. It plays out in these boards, and you gotta, traverse them and go in circles or in squares, and to defeat a certain character. It's by Idea Factory as well, but I never got into this game. I think I prefer Concept. This game was like not exactly convoluted. It was just very hard to get into and very hard to enjoy because I got to a point where I was like, why am I still playing this? Mediocre game, forgettable, D tier. The Third Birthday, the third game in the Parasite Eve series. I only included this game because I know some of you were going to be like, hey, you missed this game. But I don't think this is an RPG. This is straight a third-person shooter, man. An action game with some small RPG elements. And is it good? As a role-playing game, it's not. As a Parasite Eve game, it's not. But as a third-person shooter with some horror elements, I think it's pretty darn decent. So it's one of those games where I just can't decide if it's great or not. There are some really good things, but there are also some very bad things. So I'm gonna give it a C. Persona, the first Persona, straight port, the best version to play of this game. Still, I'm no fan of the first Persona. I think the first one is terrible, but this one was better. Still, it's a good game, but it's just not great for me. Another C tier. Persona 2 Innocent Sin is a much better game, although it's also very hard. There are some really annoying dungeons that I'd rather not talk about. But I love the characters, the battle system, and everything else. The music, man, the goddamn music. Persona 2, I will usually rank it on the B tier. But just for the sake of... I'm gonna give it an A tier, because I think it's still an excellent game. And Persona 3 is much better, in my opinion, the best Persona ever made. I still prefer the PlayStation 2 versions, because these ones were like, in terms of graphics and exploration, were watered down versions, but everything else, it's a great game, and well, it includes the girl mode, so it's no masterpiece. The PS2 version is a masterpiece, but this one, A tier, A tier. Phantasy Star Portable 1 and 2, there's actually 3 games, although the last one we didn't get it, only the first 2, and the first one is a very good game. It is a direct sequel of the PlayStation 2 titles called Phantasy Star Universe. I'm gonna give it a B. Same as the other one, even though I never finished it because I couldn't stand the main character. I forgot her name, Emilia, I think. I despise that character, but everything else is very good, and it's a direct sequel of the first one, so no point in playing this game without playing the other one first. Phantom Brave on the PSP is part of the Disgaea universe. It's very good. I think it's a game that could have been easier to get into. They included several small details that kind of make the experience a little bit bothersome, but other than that, it's a great game. I think I prefer this game over some of the Disgaea games, but either way, it's a great game. I'm gonna give it a B. Popolo Croy, a very charming, cute, memorable game. Turn-based RPG with a little bit of strategy because you move on grids, although you don't necessarily have to. It's a good game, very overlooked. A lot of people don't know this game, and I know a lot of people don't know there's actually a sequel on the 3DS called Return to Popolo Croy. I think this game is great. It gets overlooked a lot. It's not one of the best on the PSP, but it's still another great game, which means it goes into the B tier. Ragnarok Tactics is my favorite strategy RPG on the system. I don't need to cover this game because I cover it a million times, another S tier for me. Moving on to Riviera, the Promised Land. That is another hidden gem, slightly popular. It's the most well-known of the Department Heaven series. Turn-based RPG with several routes and several characters, some dating simulation here and there. It kind of gets dumb sometimes, but I guess the sense of exploration, the uniqueness of the game is what makes it stand out, so I'm gonna give it a B as well. And by the way, it's an enhanced port of the Game Boy Advance version. Spectral Souls, Resurrection of the Ethereal Empires is also one of my favorite strategy RPGs on the system. Great base, I've covered this game a million times by Idea Factory. I'm gonna put it on the A tier. Star Ocean 1 and 2 ports of the originals. First departure of the remake of the Super Nintendo version we never got, and second evolution, a port of the PlayStation version we all know and love. First departure is a great game, and second evolution, it's an A tier for me. Excellent game, just like the original. Steambot Chronicles Battle Tournament is a spin-off of the original Steambot Chronicles on the PS2. Very overlooked game, hidden gem. It's an action RPG, but this is very quest-driven. There's almost zero story here. It's all about making quests and playing in this small town. Overall, it's like a watered-down version of the original because there's little to nothing to do. It's just the same over and over again, but it's charming. I love the art style. The battle mechanics are good, even though you're playing with a clunky robot. It controls very well. Still, it's a game that it just doesn't do anything. You gotta be a hardcore fan of the original to properly enjoy this game. It's still a good game, so I'm gonna give it a C. Summon Night 5, underrated strategy RPG. It's very slow at the beginning because it has strong visual novel elements, but once you get to the action, you love it. I mean, I love the battle system here, or maybe that's because I'm a sucker for strategy RPGs. Either way, it's a fun story, even though it's kind of generic, but if you're gonna play this game, it's because of the gameplay mechanics, which are very interesting. It's a great game, I'm gonna give it a B. You guys know I'm not a fan of Tactics Ogre. The only reason I respect this game is because it is a legendary, very historically important game, and without this game, Final Fantasy Tactics wouldn't exist. But I'm not a fan of it, I couldn't get into it, I still can't, I gave up, I don't care. It might be a very good game to you, it's not to me, so I'm gonna give it a C. Tales of Eternia is the enhanced port of Tales of Destiny 2. And now, this is another game that didn't get a North American localization, a physical release. I think it's digital only, and Europe got the physical version. It's a great game, I think it's better than the original, but still, it's not one of my favorite Tales of games, but still great, so I'm gonna give it a B. Tales of the World Radiant Mythology is like the spin-off of the series, like a crossover, including a lot of the characters from the series. It's fun. If you're a fan of the Tales of games like I am, you're gonna enjoy this game. If you're not, it might seem like a very generic, repetitive, mediocre action RPG. Another C tier for me, because honestly, it's not a great game. Trails in the Sky 1 and 2, I'm a hard fan of these games, masterpieces. I want to say one thing about these two games, and it's that standalone, they're great games, they should be on the A tier, but together they make a whole game, very good game, and together they're just a masterpiece. That's why they are S tiers for me. Unchained Blades is a game that both on the 3DS and the PSP we only got the digital version. And that's okay, because it's a game that, once again, I really try to enjoy, because it starts really interesting, kind of dark, with a very dark sense of humor, but then it goes into some stupid things, some very annoying characters, some unnecessary fan service, and the battle system just ended up being a convoluted mess about recruiting small monsters and having them do certain attacks, and it is a big requirement of this game that totally ruined it for me. And it's also a dungeon crawler in first person, so I'm not the biggest fan of those games. Unchained Blades, while still a hidden gem, let's just say it's one of the least best hidden gems on the system. I'm gonna give it a D. Next up, Valhalla Knights 1 and 2. The first one is one of the absolute worst RPGs on the PSP. It's total garbage. Don't play this game. Very clunky, very unbalanced, very unnerving, stupid, boring, mediocre. It's a piece of trash, man. I'm gonna give it an E. And the second one, well, it's better. They learned from the mistakes on the first game and did a better game, but still, it's just mediocre. I think the point in these games is they have an online mode. The point was to play them online because the story mode, the campaign mode, is just it's mediocre. But at least the second one is better, so D tier? Valkyria Chronicles 2, it's a great game, the weakest in the series, but I still love it nonetheless. I just wish the characters and the story could have been better, but it's still a great game, it's still Valkyria Chronicles, I'm a die-hard fan, so B tier. Valkyrie Profile Landon is a masterpiece, a straight port of the original on the PlayStation, one of the best on both systems. You can't go wrong with either version, so might as well play whichever you like. Warriors of the Lost Empire is extremely unknown, probably the most unknown game on the system, and it did get a physical release both in Europe, Japan, and even in North America. It's an action RPG, very quest driven, a little bit dark. You can choose between 4 playable characters, different characters, but the story is the same no matter which one you choose. It does have some slight differences here and there, but overall it gets repetitive. It's a little bit like Dungeon Explorer. I think it's a good game because the combat mechanics are good and the character design is interesting and the art style is quite decent. So I'm gonna give it a C. It's a little bit of a forgettable game, but it's good. There are some things that really do stand out here. White Knight Chronicles is another game that we in North America never got. It stayed in Japan and Europe, and in Europe it did get a physical version. And it's a prequel to the White Knight Chronicles series. It takes place like 1,000 years before the original. Again, it's quest driven, very good. It does stand out a little bit above most of the ones that I've included on the C tier. Usually I will rank this game on the C tier because it's just very quest driven and somewhat repetitive, and most of the dungeons look exactly the same and you're gonna have to beat these dungeons over and over again, so it gets tiresome. But it has some charming characters, some memorable moments, some really cool ideas. It does stand out a little bit more than the others, so I'm gonna give it a B. Wild Arms Crossfire is a strategy RPG, a great idea gone wrong. Spin-off of the Wild Arms series, this game, the story was great and the characters were great as well, some really neat ideas. It's just they totally screwed with the unbalanced missions, the escort missions. It became extremely hard and it just turned me off, man. It's not that great, so I'm gonna give it a D. Yggdra Union, I've covered this game a million times. It's a great game, also full of problems, but, well, I've covered this game a million times. No reason for me to talk about it anymore. Now, moving on to the East series. We're almost there, almost at the end. All of them, I've talked about them a million times. The first one is the enhanced remake of the first 2 games. Great, amazing, but still kind of short and a little bit on the side, but it's still a great collection. East The Oath in Felghana is a full remake of East 3. Great game, almost a masterpiece. This goes straight into A. Then is East 6, port of the PlayStation 2 version. The PlayStation 2 version is the one to go. This one is full of problems and graphically speaking it looks slightly bad. So it's still a great game, it's still an East game, a B tier. And East 7 is almost a masterpiece, the best East game on the PSP. I'm gonna put it on the A tier. It does stand out, man. It's a very good game. Last but not least, Setai Hero Project. A game I've barely covered here because it's one of the hardest roguelike RPGs in existence, made by NIS and with some of the team from the Disgaea games. So imagine, this game is really hard. Very fun, the comedy is fun, it doesn't take itself seriously at all. It's very memorable. If you're into those kinds of games, I really recommend this game because it's very hard, but it's very fun to play and just very unique. While still a hidden gem, I'm gonna give it a C. We're done, people, we're done! This was my ranking on the PSP, its entire JRPG library with an official English release. If I missed one game, well, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to forgive me. 86 games, man. Anyway, that's it for today, people. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!